The housekeeper heard cries every night, until she discovered what the stepmother was doing with the millionaire's little daughter. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from. The rain pounded against the bulletproof windows of the Uber as it climbed the steep hill of Beverly Hills that March night. Constance Smith, 45, nervously gripped the handle of her synthetic leather bag while watching the imposing mansions parade by the window. Coming from rural Texas, she never imagined she would one day set foot in a neighborhood like this, where each house was worth more than her entire hometown collected in taxes each year. "This is it, ma'am," the driver murmured, stopping in front of a majestic wrought iron gate rising between stone walls. The golden plaque shone even in the rain. Smith Residence. Constance stepped out of the car, shielding herself with a battered umbrella, and approached the intercom. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. At 45, she had raised 6 children alone after her husband abandoned her, working as a housekeeper, street vendor, and elderly caregiver. Now, for the first time in her life, she would have a formal job with a salary that would not only allow her to survive, but to dream. "Good evening. I am Constance Smith, the new employee," she said into the intercom, trying to control the southern accent that always intensified when she was nervous. The gate opened silently, revealing a garden that looked like it came out of a decor magazine. Palm trees lined a cobblestone path leading to the main entrance of the mansion. The 3-story building blended classical architecture with modern touches. Marble columns supported a wide balcony, while enormous mirrored glass windows reflected the garden lights. At the main door, an elegant woman awaited her. Victoria Smith, 35, was everything Constance imagined a Beverly Hills lady should be. Perfectly styled blonde hair, manicured nails, wearing a cream silk ensemble that cost more than the minimum wage. However, her smile did not reach her cold blue eyes. "You must be Constance," Victoria said, extending a cold hand. "I'm Victoria Smith. My husband is traveling for work, so I will introduce you to the house." Constance immediately noticed the condescending tone, disguised by artificial politeness. It was a type of treatment she knew well, that which placed clear distances between employers and employees, even when trying to seem cordial. "It's a pleasure, Mrs. Victoria. I am very grateful for the opportunity," Constance replied, maintaining the respectful posture she had learned in other jobs, but mentally noting every detail of that first meeting. The mansion inside was even more impressive. The entrance hall had a ceiling height of nearly 20 feet, with an Austrian crystal chandelier that Victoria made a point of mentioning had cost a small fortune. The walls were clad in travertine marble, and a curving staircase with a mahogany railing led to the upper floors. Each room on the ground floor seemed to have come from a decor showcase. A living room with Italian leather sofas, a dining room with a table for 12, and a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. "Your role will be to take care of the house during the night, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., Victoria explained as they walked. "General cleaning, organization, care for the indoor plants, and overall supervision of the property." Constance noticed a strange hesitation in the word supervision, but did not ask. Her life experience had taught her that some answers came with time, not questions. "The house has modern security systems," Victoria continued, showing a complex digital panel. "Cameras in all main rooms, motion sensors, silent alarms. You will receive a manual with all the instructions." It was when they passed the piano room that Constance heard it for the first time, a nearly imperceptible sound, like a muffled sob coming from the upper floor. Victoria pretended not to notice, but Constance saw her shoulders stiffen slightly. "And the girl?" Constance asked, remembering that during the phone interview they had mentioned a child in the house. "Sophia is 6 years old," Victoria replied dryly. "She is my husband's daughter from his first marriage. A difficult child, very spoiled by her biological mother before the accident that left us responsible for her. She goes to bed early and should not be disturbed at night. She has a very light sleep." Constance sensed the coldness with which Victoria referred to her stepdaughter and felt a tightness in her chest. In her experience as a mother, she knew how to recognize when a child was not receiving the necessary affection. "Where does she study?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Private school, private tutoring at home, swimming, ballet," Victoria listed mechanically. "She has a very busy schedule." My husband insists on giving her the best education possible." At that moment, another sob echoed, louder this time. Victoria stopped abruptly and looked at the ceiling with an expression that mixed irritation and something Constance could not fully identify. Guilt, perhaps? "She must be having nightmares again," Victoria murmured. "It's a phase. The therapist said it's normal after losing her mother." Constance wanted to ask how long the girl had lost her mother, but something in Victoria's tone stopped her. There were secrets in that house. She could feel it. And her intuition, sharpened by years of hardship, rarely deceived her. The rest of the introduction proceeded in professional silence. Victoria showed where the cleaning supplies were kept, explained the routine for caring for the indoor plants, a true oasis with bromeliads, orchids, and a water fountain, and handed over the necessary keys and codes. "If you have any questions, you can reach me until 10 p.m., Victoria said. "After that, I prefer not to be disturbed. I have important social gatherings and need to always be well-disposed." When Constance finally found herself alone in the mansion, she made a silent prayer, as she always did when starting a new job. She asked for protection, wisdom, and strength to do her best. But mostly, she asked, in the house that, despite all its beauty and wealth, seemed to carry a deep sadness within its travertine marble walls, Constance felt a sensitivity to understand what was truly happening. The sobs coming from the upper floor continued for another hour, breaking the silence of the California night. Constance had been working at the Smith residence for 2 weeks, and the nightly routine had established itself with almost mathematical precision. She arrived promptly at 10 p.m., when Victoria retreated to her master bedroom on the 3rd floor and began her activities in a sequence she had memorized. First, cleaning the family rooms, then tending to the indoor garden, and finally, general organization of the spaces. But it was always between 11:30 p.m. and midnight that the sobs would start. Constance was in the indoor garden watering the orchids when she heard it again. This time, however, in addition to the muffled crying, she caught something that made her stop immediately. A small child's voice whispering words she couldn't fully understand, but whose desperate tone sent chills down her spine. "Mommy, please come back. I promise I'll be good." Constance's heart raced. Those were the same words her youngest daughter, Mary, repeated for months after the separation, crying in secret, thinking it was her fault. She knew that kind of childhood suffering too well to ignore it. She quietly ascended the marble stairs, her footsteps muffled by the Persian carpet lining the steps. The 1st floor housed the guest rooms and an office. The 2nd floor contained Edward Smith's master suite and other rooms, while the 3rd floor was Victoria's territory. But it was on the 2nd floor that she located the source of the sobs. The door to the children's room was ajar, letting out a sliver of rosy light. Constance cautiously approached and, through the crack, glimpsed a scene that broke her heart. Sophie was sitting on the floor of the room, facing away from the door, rocking back and forth while holding a worn teddy bear. The room, decorated in shades of pink and white, had all the luxuries a child could desire. A princess bed with a canopy, shelves filled with books, and a dollhouse that looked like a perfect replica of a Victorian mansion. But there was something profoundly melancholic about that environment, as if all that opulence couldn't mask the loneliness that permeated the air. "Is Sophie having trouble sleeping?" Constance asked softly, gently pushing the door open. The girl turned around startled, her large green eyes shining with tears. She was even more fragile than Constance had imagined. Messy curly blonde hair, a small delicate face marked by crying, wearing a silk pajama that seemed to engulf her. "Are you going to scold me?" Sophie whispered, shrinking against the wall. "Victoria said that a crying child will be punished." Constance felt a wave of anger rise in her chest, but managed to control herself. She approached slowly, as she would with injured animals, and knelt down to the child's level. "Of course not, my dear. I'm Constance, the new aunt who will take care of the house at night." "And do you know what aunts do when they find a sad little princess?" she asked, using the affectionate tone she reserved for her own children. Sophie shook her head, still wary. "Aunts make a nice warm chamomile tea and tell stories until sleep comes," Constance said, extending her hand. "Would you like to try?" The girl hesitated for a few seconds that felt eternal, but finally extended her cold little hand. Constance carefully enveloped her, feeling how thin and cold she was. They went down to the kitchen together, a spacious and modern area with black granite countertops and state-of-the-art appliances. Constance prepared the tea while Sophie sat on a high stool, watching every movement with a mix of curiosity and distrust. "Do you have children, Aunt Constance?" Sophie asked, swinging her legs. "I have 6, my princess. They're all grown up now, but they're still my babies," Constance replied, pouring the tea into a china cup with floral designs. "And you know what? They all had trouble sleeping when they were little too." "Really?" Sophie's eyes lit up for the first time. "Really? My Mary, who is almost your age, could only sleep if I sang the nursery rhyme," Constance shared, sitting next to the girl. "Would you like me to sing for you?" Sophie nodded shyly, and Constance began to hum softly while the girl sipped her tea. Gradually, Sophie's little shoulders relaxed, and she began to speak. "My mommy used to sing to me too," she said, her voice choked. "She sang a really beautiful lullaby in English, but I don't remember all the words anymore." "She must be singing to you from heaven," Constance replied gently. "Mommies never stop taking care of their children, even when they're not close by anymore. Victoria said my mommy doesn't come back because I'm a bad girl, that I made her leave," Sophie whispered, tears welling up again. Constance felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. The cruelty of that statement was so absurd, so destructive, that for a moment she was left speechless. She took a deep breath, invoking all the wisdom that motherhood had taught her. "Sophie, look me in the eyes," she said, gently holding the child's face. "Your mommy didn't leave because of you. Mommies go to heaven when God needs them there, but it is never, ever the fault of the little ones. You are a good, beautiful, and loved girl." "But Victoria said," Sophie began. Victoria was wrong, Constance interrupted firmly. "Sometimes adults say wrong things when they're sad or worried. But I'll tell you a secret. I know good girls, and you are one of them." Sophie smiled for the first time, a shy smile that completely transformed her little face. "Can I tell you another secret?" the girl whispered, looking around as if checking if anyone was listening. Constance nodded, sensing she was about to discover something important. "I can play the piano," Sophie said, with a mix of pride and fear. "I taught myself by watching videos on the tablet when Victoria is out, but she can't know, because she said piano noise gives her a headache." "That's wonderful," exclaimed Constance, genuinely impressed. "You taught yourself? What a smart girl. Do you want to hear?" Sophie asked excitedly. Constance glanced at the clock. It was almost 2 in the morning, but something told her that this moment was too important to miss. "Of course I want to, but very quietly, okay?" They went down to the piano room, where a majestic Steinway grand piano occupied the center of the space. Sophie sat on the bench, which was too high for her, and began to play a simple melody, but performed with a sensitivity that surprised Constance. It was Für Elise by Beethoven, played with small technical errors, but with an expressiveness that sent chills down Constance's spine. The girl closed her eyes as she played, as if the music transported her to another place, far from the sadness she carried. When she finished, Sophie looked at Constance expectantly. "It was beautiful, my princess. You have a very special gift," Constance said, hugging the girl. "Your mommy must be very proud of you up in heaven." At that moment, a noise from upstairs startled them both. Firm footsteps coming down the stairs. "Quickly, let's go upstairs," Constance whispered, picking Sophie up. They managed to reach the girl's room just seconds before Victoria appeared in the hallway, wearing a silk robe and with an irritated expression. "Constance, what are you doing up here?" she asked, her tone a mix of suspicion and authority. "The girl was thirsty, Miss Victoria. I asked for a glass of water and came to bring it." Constance lied naturally, showing the empty glass she had taken from the kitchen. Victoria looked from Constance to Sophie, who was already in bed pretending to sleep, and back to Constance. "Next time, let her come down by herself. Sophie needs to learn independence," she said coldly. "And I prefer there to be no unnecessary circulation in the rooms during the night." "Yes, ma'am," Constance replied, keeping her tone respectful but storing every word of that conversation in her memory. When Victoria left, Constance said goodbye to Sophie with a kiss on the forehead and a whispered promise. "I'll be back tomorrow, and you can teach me more songs on the piano." For the first time in 2 weeks, the sobs did not echo through the mansion for the rest of the night. The 3rd month of work in the Smith mansion brought a routine that Constance could never have imagined. Her nights transformed into a delicate dance of care. Officially, she cleaned and organized the house. Unofficially, she became the only source of affection that Sophie received during the long hours of darkness. Edward Smith had returned from a business trip the previous week, and Constance finally met the patriarch of the family. Tall, with broad shoulders and well-groomed gray hair, he emanated the authority of someone who built an empire from nothing. His calloused hands contrasted with his impeccable suits, revealing a past as a construction worker who became a magnate in the construction industry in Los Angeles. "Constance, isn't it?" he said on the first morning they met, as she was leaving and he was arriving from a morning run. "Victoria spoke very highly of your work." "Thank you, Mr. Edward. It's an honor to work for your family," she replied, noticing how he avoided looking directly into her eyes, a behavior she recognized in powerful men who preferred to keep their distance from employees. "How is Sophie behaving?" "I hope she isn't causing trouble during the night," he asked, but there was something mechanical in the question, as if it were more protocol than genuine concern. "The girl is an angel, sir. Very polite and affectionate," Constance replied, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes she has trouble sleeping, just child stuff, but nothing that a kind conversation can't fix." Edward nodded distractedly, already checking his phone. Great. Well, I have a meeting at 7. If there are any problems, talk to Victoria." And he hurried out, leaving Constance with the clear impression that, for him, his daughter was more of a responsibility to be managed than a child to be loved. It was in the second week after Edward's return that Constance made the discovery that would change everything. She was cleaning the library, an imposing room with mahogany shelves that reached from floor to ceiling, when she heard a strange noise coming from behind one of the shelves. Upon investigating further, she discovered that one of the shelves actually concealed a small passage, probably a hiding place created by the mansion's former owner. And it was there, in that narrow and dusty space, that she found the recorder. It was a small pink device, clearly a children's toy, but it worked perfectly. Constance hesitated for a moment before pressing the play button, but her motherly intuition spoke louder. Sophie's voice echoed in the silence of the library, and what Constance heard made her collapse into one of the leather armchairs. March 15th. Today Victoria locked me in my room again because I asked if I could call Grandma Mary. She said Grandma doesn't want to talk to me anymore because I am a problem child. I'm very thirsty, but I can't go out until she says I can. Constance paused the recording, her hands trembling. Grandma Mary must be Edward's mother, and Sophie clearly didn't know that her grandmother was being prevented from visiting her. She continued listening, and each recording was a stab to the heart. March 20th. Victoria forgot to give me lunch again. She said fat girls can't get rich husbands. I ate 2 cookies that I had hidden in the drawer. March 25th. Daddy came back from his trip, but Victoria told him I was sick and couldn't leave my room. I'm not sick. I just wanted a hug from Daddy. April 2nd. I managed to play the whole song that Mommy liked. I think she heard it up there. I felt a gentle breeze on my face, as if from heaven. Victoria said it was just a crazy child's imagination. Constance turned off the recorder and silently cried there in the library. In her 45 years of life, she had seen a lot of poverty, a lot of pain, a lot of injustice. But she had never witnessed such calculated cruelty, so meticulously disguised as care. In the following days, she began to observe the dynamics of the house with new eyes. Edward left early and returned late, always absorbed in work calls. When he was home, Victoria monopolized his attention with discussions about social events, renovations at the beach house, charity dinners. Sophie was kept busy with tutoring, extracurricular activities, anything to keep her away from her father. One night, while organizing Edward's office, Constance found another hidden recorder, but this one was not a toy. It was a professional device, and when she turned it on, she discovered that someone was recording conversations in the house. The voices were Victoria's and a friend's. "I don't know how much longer I can keep up this charade, Claudia," Victoria said. "The girl is getting smarter, asking questions. And Edward's mother keeps insisting on visiting. You need to be more careful," the other voice replied. "If Edward finds out how you treat his daughter, he won't find out. He's so focused on business that he barely notices he has a daughter. And when he does, I always have an excuse ready. The girl is sick. She's throwing a tantrum. She's being difficult." "And the money?" Edward's ex-wife's will. Sophie will inherit a fortune when she turns 18. But until then, I'm the one managing everything. If she, let's say, decided to live with her grandmother or at a boarding school far away, I would have more freedom to manage the resources. Constance turned off the recorder feeling nauseous. Now she understood everything. Victoria was not only mistreating Sophie out of cruelty, but had financial motives as well. She was trying to make the girl's life so unbearable that she would ask to leave home herself. The next morning, when Sophie appeared in the kitchen crying again, Constance made a decision. She sat the girl on the counter and held her cold little hands. Sophie, I need to ask you something very important, and I want you to be honest with me, okay? The girl nodded, confident. Would you like to talk to your Grandma Mary? Sophie's eyes filled with tears instantly. Does Aunt Claudia know where she is? Victoria said she moved far away and doesn't want to see me anymore. Your grandma didn't move, sweetheart, and I'm sure she loves you very much. Constance took a deep breath. But for me to help you talk to her, I need you to tell me everything that happens here during the day. Everything, without fear. And then, for the first time in months, Sophie opened up. She talked about the endless punishments, being locked in her room for hours, about meals denied as punishment, about the lies Victoria told Edward, about the isolation from her grandparents and the few friends she had. Aunt Constance, Sophie whispered at the end, do you think my daddy still loves me? Sometimes I think he forgot I exist. Constance hugged the girl tightly, feeling all the responsibility that had fallen on her shoulders. She was no longer just an employee in a wealthy house. She was the only person in a position to save a child who was being systematically destroyed from the inside. Your daddy loves you, my princess. He just doesn't know what's happening. But Aunt Constance will find a way to tell him, okay? When she put Sophie to bed that night, Constance already had a plan formed in her mind. It was risky, it could cost her job, but some things were more important than financial security. Some things were worth fighting for, even if the battle seemed impossible to win. Continue. Chapter 4. The Recorder and the Secrets. Tuesday morning brought an unusual excitement to the Smith mansion. Constance arrived early for work, at 7 p.m. instead of the usual 10 p.m., because Victoria had asked for her help in preparing for an important dinner. Edward was hosting Japanese investors interested in a construction project for a new shopping center in South Los Angeles. Constance, I need everything to be perfect today, Victoria said, examining the already impeccably set dining table. These clients represent a $50 million contract. There can be no disturbances. The tone in which she said disturbances made it clear she was referring to Sophie. The girl had been sent to her room right after lunch, with strict instructions not to come out until the next day. Of course, Mrs. Victoria. The house is spotless, Constance replied, but inside she was boiling with anger at the thought of Sophie locked in her room for over 12 hours straight. While organizing the china cabinet in the dining room, Constance overheard Victoria talking on the phone with someone. Yes, Dr. Helen, I understand your concern. But as I've explained, Sophie has been going through a very difficult phase. Constant tantrums, aggression, lies. Edward and I are seriously considering enrolling her in a boarding school in Switzerland. Constance nearly dropped a crystal glass. Dr. Helen must be Sophie's therapist, and Victoria was clearly manipulating the account of the girl's behavior. No, a new in-person consultation isn't necessary for now, Victoria continued. I believe a more structured environment would be beneficial for her, away from the traumatic memories here at home. When Victoria hung up, Constance realized she had found another piece of the puzzle. Victoria was not only mistreating Sophie, she was building a false medical history to justify sending the girl away. At 8 p.m., the guests began to arrive. Constance discreetly observed them while serving canapés. 3 men in dark suits, serious expressions, speaking formal English with a Japanese accent. Edward was in his element, animatedly gesturing as he showcased the project plans on a side table. The land is located in an upscale neighborhood in Los Angeles, Edward explained. 15,000 square feet, with potential for 200 stores, a cinema, a food court, and commercial towers. Victoria circulated elegantly among the guests, translating comments, offering expensive wines, perfectly embodying the role of the sophisticated wife. To an outsider, it was the perfect family, the successful businessman, the charming wife, the luxurious home. But Constance knew the truth hidden behind that facade. Around 10:30 p.m., when dinner was being served, Constance heard a soft sound coming from the piano in the family room. Her heart raced. It was Sophie playing, probably having escaped from her room while everyone was distracted with dinner. The melody was sad and melancholic, played with a sensitivity that always surprised Constance. But then she realized that the music was reaching the dining room, and she saw Edward lift his head, frowning. "What is that sound?" asked one of the Japanese investors. "It sounds like a piano," another replied, trying to locate the source of the music. Victoria paled. "It must be the ambient sound system. Sometimes it malfunctions," she quickly lied, standing up. "Constance, can you check that for me?" Constance rushed to the piano room, where she found Sophie sitting at the instrument, completely absorbed in the music. The girl was in her pajamas, her bare feet barely reaching the pedals, but she played with an expression of peace that Constance had never seen on her face. "Sophie, my dear, you need to go upstairs now," Constance whispered, approaching slowly so as not to startle the child. "Just a little longer, Aunt Constance," Sophie asked without stopping her playing. "This music makes me feel close to Mommy." At that moment, Victoria appeared in the doorway, her face twisted with anger. "Sophie, what are you doing here? Didn't I tell you to stay in your room?" The girl stopped playing immediately, her body shrinking in fear. "Sorry, Victoria. I just wanted to. Go upstairs now," Victoria said through clenched teeth, trying to keep her voice low so as not to alert the guests. "And I don't want to hear another word." Constance saw tears welling up in Sophie's eyes and felt something break inside her. She could no longer be just a silent observer. "Ms. Victoria," she said, protectively positioning herself next to Sophie. The girl wasn't bothering anyone. The music was beautiful. Victoria looked at Constance with an expression that mixed surprise and threat. "Constance, you weren't hired to give opinions on child rearing. Take Sophie to her room and make sure she stays there." "Mommy didn't like it when I played the piano?" Sophie suddenly asked, her voice small and broken. "Is that why she left?" The innocent question fell like a bomb in the room. Victoria was momentarily speechless, and Constance saw an opportunity. "Your mommy loved to hear you play, my princess," Constance said firmly, ignoring Victoria's murderous glare. "I'm sure she would be very proud to see how well you play." "How can you know that?" Victoria exploded, losing her composure for a second. "You never knew her mother." "I didn't know her," Constance admitted, "but I know mothers. And all mothers are proud of their children's talents." At that moment, Edward appeared in the doorway, clearly irritated by the delay. "What's going on here?" "Our guests are asking about the music." "Nothing much," Victoria said quickly. Sophie was throwing a tantrum, but it's all resolved now. Edward looked at his daughter, who was standing next to the piano like a small, fragile statue. For a moment, just a moment, Constance saw something pass through his eyes. Surprise? Recognition? Guilt? "Sophie plays piano?" Edward asked, as if he were seeing his daughter for the first time. "A little," Sophie replied shyly. "I taught myself, Daddy." "By yourself?" Edward seemed genuinely surprised. "What do you mean by yourself?" Victoria rushed to intervene. "She messes around with the keys sometimes, but it's nothing serious. A child doesn't have the discipline to learn real music." "But I can play real music," Sophie protested, with a courage that surprised Constance. "I know Fur Elise completely, and also Claire de Lune." Edward was silent for a few seconds. "Beethoven?" he asked. Sophie nodded enthusiastically, and for the first time in months, Constance saw the girl's face light up in her father's presence. "Maybe another day you can show me," Edward said, but his tone was distant, as if he were just being polite. "Can it be now?" Sophie asked, hopeful. "Not now, my daughter. We have important guests." Edward was already turning to leave. "Victoria, please handle this." And he left, leaving Sophie with a devastated face and Constance wanting to scream. Victoria waited for Edward to be out of sight before approaching Sophie with an expression that chilled Constance's blood. "You embarrassed me in front of important people," she said in a venomous whisper. "Tomorrow you will learn what happens to disobedient girls." Constance picked Sophie up, feeling how the girl trembled. "I'll take her to her room, Miss Victoria." As she climbed the stairs with Sophie, Constance made a definitive decision. No matter the consequences, she had to find a way to connect Edward with the reality of what was happening to his daughter. Because that night, Watching hope ignite and then extinguish in Sophie's eyes, Constance understood that time was running out. The girl was being broken inside, piece by piece, and soon there would be nothing left to save. The morning after the dinner with the Japanese investors brought a palpable tension to the Smith mansion. Constance arrived at 10 p.m. to find the house in a sepulchral silence, but a heavy silence, laden with unspoken consequences. Victoria had left a note in the kitchen. Sophie is grounded. She must not be disturbed for any reason. Constance crumpled the paper between her fingers, feeling the anger boil in her chest. She began her cleaning routine with more forceful movements than usual, indignation manifesting in the strength with which she wiped the furniture, in the energy with which she vacuumed the Persian rugs. Around midnight, while organizing Edward's office, she heard footsteps upstairs. They were not the firm steps of Victoria, but something more cautious, stealthy. She quietly ascended and found Sophie in the hallway, walking like a little ghost toward the bathroom. The sight of the girl shocked her. Sophie looked even thinner, with deep dark circles marking her pale little face. She wore the same pajamas from the previous night, wrinkled as if she had slept on the floor. "Sophie," Constance whispered. The girl turned, and Constance saw that she was silently crying. "Aunt Constance, I can't talk to you. Victoria said that if I spoke to anyone in the house, she would send me far away from Daddy." Constance felt her heart break. She knelt to Sophie's height and gently held her cold little hands. "Sweetheart, are you hungry?" Sophie nodded timidly. "I haven't eaten anything since yesterday morning. Victoria said that disobedient girls don't deserve food." The cruelty of that punishment left Constance speechless for a few seconds. A 6-year-old child deprived of food for more than 24 hours. That was torture, plain and simple. "Come with me," Constance said, picking Sophie up. "Let's fix this right now." In the kitchen, she prepared a ham and cheese sandwich, warmed a glass of milk, and sat next to Sophie as she ate with the desperate hunger of someone who was truly in need. "Aunt Constance," Sophie said between bites, "do you think my daddy really loves me? Because sometimes I think he would be happier if I didn't exist." The question hit Constance like a punch. Seeing a 6-year-old child questioning whether she deserved to be loved was something that should never happen. "Of course your daddy loves you, my princess. He's just very busy with work and doesn't realize when you need him. But yesterday I played the piano for him, and he didn't even want to listen," Sophie said, her voice choked. "Mommy always wanted to listen. She said I played like a little angel." Constance hugged the girl, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. "You know what? I think your daddy needs to remember how important it is to spend time with you. And maybe Auntie can help with that." After putting Sophie to bed, Constance returned to the office with renewed determination. If Edward wasn't seeing what was happening to his own daughter, she would need to find a way to open his eyes. It was while organizing a stack of documents that something caught her attention. Among the folders of contracts and architectural plans, there was a small red leather notebook, half hidden behind a framed photo of Edward with investors. Constance hesitated. Tampering with personal documents was crossing a line she had never crossed. But something in her intuition, the same one that alerted her when her own children were in danger, made her open the notebook. It was a diary, and it wasn't Edward's. The neat handwriting on the first page revealed the author's identity. Personal Diary of Victoria Smith. Constance felt her stomach churn, but she continued reading. The first entries were dated 2 years ago, shortly after the wedding. June 15th, 2023. Edward finally proposed to me. I'm going to be rich. The mansion is even more beautiful than I imagined. I just need to deal with the girl. Sophie is very attached to her father. She will be an obstacle to my plans. Constance turned the pages with trembling hands. July 3rd, 2023. I found out today about Edward's ex-wife's will. Sophie will inherit a fortune at 18, $5 million plus company shares. If I can get her to leave before that, I can convince Edward to change the will. I need to be smart. The following entries were even more disturbing. August 20th, 2023. I started convincing Edward that Sophie needs strict discipline. I told him she's too spoiled and needs to learn limits. He agrees. Men don't understand anything about child education anyway. September 15th, 2023. I forbade Sophie from seeing Grandma Mary. I told Edward that the woman was filling the girl's head with fantasies about her dead mother. He accepted without questioning. Perfect. October 2nd, 2023. Sophie continues to resist. I need to be more creative. I started telling her that her mother left because of her. Children are easy to manipulate when you attack their self-esteem. Constance had to stop reading to avoid vomiting. The meticulous cruelty of those words was shocking even for someone who had witnessed much evil in life. But she continued because she needed to understand the extent of what was happening. December 10th, 2023. Great progress. Sophie is quieter, more withdrawn. She stopped asking to see her father. Edward commented the other day that she is more well-behaved. If he only knew it's because she's afraid to breathe. February 18th, 2024. I spoke with Dr. Helen. I'm going to start building a medical history that Sophie has behavioral disorders. Over time, I can convince Edward that she needs specialized treatment away from home. March 25th, 2024. Edward is considering sending Sophie to a boarding school in Switzerland. He said that maybe it would be better for her to have a more rigorous education. I'm almost there. I just need to speed up the process. The last entry was from just 3 days ago, November 5th, 2024. The new maid is becoming a problem. I noticed she has an annoying maternal instinct with Sophie. I need to keep an eye on her. If she starts asking questions or interfering with my educational methods, I will have to let her go. Constance closed the diary, her hands trembling with anger and shock. Victoria was not just cruel. She was calculating, manipulative, and Constance was systematically destroying a child for financial gain. But now she had proof. Written evidence in Victoria's own handwriting. She photographed each relevant page with her phone, being careful not to leave traces. Then, she placed the diary exactly where she had found it and left the office with her heart racing. She went up to Sophie's room and found her awake, looking out the window at the illuminated garden. "Can't sleep, my princess." "I'm scared," whispered Sophie. "Victoria said if I don't behave, she'll send me away from Daddy forever." Constance sat on the edge of the bed and held the girl's hand. "Sophie, I'm going to tell you a secret. You are much stronger than you think. And there are people who love you very much, even when you can't see them." "Really?" Sophie's eyes sparkled with a glimmer of hope. "Really? And you know what? I think it's time for your daddy to discover how special you are." Constance spent the rest of the night planning. She had information that could destroy Victoria, but she needed to be careful. If she acted hastily, Victoria could simply deny everything and speed up the process of sending Sophie away. She needed a foolproof strategy. And more importantly, she needed to find a way to show Dr. Edward not only Victoria's cruelty, but also the beauty and talent of the daughter he was losing. Because after reading that diary, Constance understood that she was not just saving a child from abuse. She was saving an entire family from destroying itself forever. Trying again. Continue. Chapter 6. The Revelation Plan. The dawn of Friday brought an unexpected opportunity. Dr. Edward had canceled a last-minute trip due to issues with a project in San Diego, and for the first time in weeks, he would spend the entire weekend at home. Constance learned the news through Carmen, the cook, who commented during the shift change. "Ms. Victoria is furious. She had planned a spa weekend in the mountains with her friends, but now she has to stay because Dr. Edward wants a family weekend," said Carmen, making air quotes. As if this house knew the meaning of the word family. Constance picked up on the hint. Carmen, a 60-year-old woman who had worked for the Smiths for only 6 months, had also noticed the oddities in the family dynamic. "Carmen, can I ask you a question?" Constance said, checking to see if they were alone in the kitchen. "Have you noticed anything different about the way Sophie is treated?" Carmen stopped putting away the dishes and looked directly at Constance. "My dear, in 60 years of life, I've worked in many rich people's homes. I've seen a lot of selfishness, a lot of coldness, but I've never seen a child treated like little Sophie is treated in this house." "What do you mean?" "That girl is like a shadow. She sometimes appears in the kitchen, asking for a glass of water, afraid to disturb. A 6-year-old child, Constance. She should be making noise, messing up the house, bothering her parents. But she behaves as if she's apologizing for existing." Constance felt immense relief to discover she was not alone in her concerns. "Do you think Dr. Edward knows how his daughter is treated?" Carmen sighed deeply. "Dr. Edward is a good man, but he's blind. Completely blind. He works 16 hours a day, travels 3 weeks a month. Miss Victoria manages to control the entire narrative about the girl. And what if I told you I have proof that the situation is much worse than we imagined? Carmen leaned in, lowering her voice. What kind of proof? Constance hesitated for a moment, but the urgency of the situation spoke louder. She showed some of the photos she had taken of Victoria's diary, being careful not to reveal how she had gained access. Carmen's expression changed as she read, shifting from surprise to horror, and finally to deep indignation. My God, she murmured. This woman is a demon disguised as an angel. Carmen, I need your help, Constance said. I have a plan, but I can't execute it alone. At that moment, they heard footsteps approaching. Victoria entered the kitchen wearing a white silk robe, her hair perfectly styled even though it was only 7 in the morning. Carmen, Dr. Edwards' breakfast needs to be ready in 15 minutes. He has a video conference at 8, she said, without greeting either Constance or Carmen. And Constance, I don't know why you're here so early, but since you are, you can take Sophie's breakfast to her room. She's still on punishment. How long will this punishment last, Ms. Victoria? Constance asked, trying to maintain a respectful tone. Victoria glared at her coldly. Until I decide she has learned her lesson. And I don't remember asking for your opinion on educational methods. After Victoria left, Carmen and Constance exchanged meaningful glances. The plan was forming. Throughout the day, as Constance observed the household routine, she set her strategy in motion. She knew she had a very small window of opportunity. Dr. Edward would be home, but Victoria would do everything to keep Sophie away from her father. The first part of the plan was simple. Ensure that Dr. Edward heard Sophie playing the piano, but not accidentally, as had happened during dinner. It needed to be something planned, impactful, impossible to ignore. Around 2 p.m., Constance quietly went up to Sophie's room. The girl was sitting on the bed, drawing in an old notebook. The drawings were revealing. Dark figures, windowless houses, a small girl always alone in dark corners. Sophie, can I talk to you? Constance said, sitting on the edge of the bed. Victoria will be mad if she knows you came here, Sophie whispered, but her eyes sparkled with happiness at seeing Constance. Let Annie worry about that. I want to ask you a question. Important. Would you like to play the piano for your daddy? For real this time. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. More than anything in the world. But he never has time for me. What if I told you that today he will have time? How about you prepare a very special song to show him? Sophie perked up for the first time in days. What song? The one your mommy loved the most. Do you remember which one it was? Clair de Lune by Beethoven. She always asked me to play it, even when I hit the wrong notes. Perfect. Tonight, when I give the signal, you come down and play that song. Can you do that for me? Sophie nodded enthusiastically, but then her expression turned worried. What if Victoria gets mad? Constance cupped the little girl's face in her hands. My princess, sometimes in life we need to be brave to achieve important things. And your daddy needs to hear how well you play. At 6 p.m., Constance set the second part of the plan into motion. She sought out Edward in his office, where he was reviewing architectural plans. Dr. Edward, excuse me. May I speak with you for a moment? Edward looked up from his papers, appearing slightly surprised. Of course, Constance. Is there a problem? Not exactly a problem, doctor. It's about Sophie. Edward's expression changed subtly. What about Sophie? Is she okay? She is physically well, doctor. But, may I be frank with you? Edward gestured for her to continue. Dr. Edward, in all my years caring for children, I've never seen a girl as talented as Sophie. She plays the piano like an angel, and she learned everything by herself. Victoria mentioned that she sometimes messes around on the keys. Edward said, with little interest. No, doctor. She doesn't mess around on the keys. She plays complete pieces by Beethoven, Mozart. She knows pieces by heart that adult musicians take years to learn. Edward was silent for a few seconds. Seriously? Absolutely. And the saddest thing is that she only wants one thing in the world, to play for you, to show how special she is. Constance saw something change in Edward's eyes. A spark of curiosity, perhaps even guilt. When you say she plays complete songs. Dr. Edward, could you spare 10 minutes of your evening to listen to your daughter play? I guarantee it will be an experience you will never forget. Edward looked at the clock, then at the plans spread across the table, and finally at Constance. All right. After dinner, you can ask her to play something. Thank you, Dr. Edward. You won't regret it. As Constance left the office, her heart raced. The first part of the plan was in motion. Now she needed to coordinate the perfect timing. At 8 p.m., during dinner, Victoria monopolized the conversation with comments about the cancellation of the trip and the inconveniences of having to rearrange the social calendar. Edward ate in silence, clearly still thinking about work. It was then that Carmen entered the dining room with a dessert tray that the second part of the plan was activated. "Dr. Edward," said Carmen, "little Sophie asked if she could play a song on the piano for you after dinner. She said she prepared something special." Victoria nearly choked on her wine. "Carmen, Sophie is grounded. She shouldn't even be making requests." "Actually," Edward interrupted, surprising both women, "I would like to hear it. Constance told me today that Sophie plays very well." Victoria's face lost all color. "Edward, dear, you know how Sophie can be dramatic. I don't think it's a good idea to encourage her when she should be learning discipline." "It's just a few minutes, Victoria. What's the problem?" Victoria tried to argue, but Edward was already getting up from the table. "Carmen, could you please call Sophie?" Constance, who had been watching everything from the kitchen, smiled for the first time in weeks. The plan was working. The sound of little Sophie's bare feet on the marble stairs echoed through the mansion like a symphony of hope. Constance watched from afar, her heart racing so fast it felt like it might leap from her chest. In the piano room, Edward sat waiting in one of the leather armchairs, while Victoria stood near the window, arms crossed, and an expression that mixed nervousness and restrained anger. Sophie appeared at the entrance of the room wearing a light blue dress that Constance had found at the back of the little girl's closet, a beautiful piece that clearly hadn't been worn in months. Her blonde hair was carefully styled, and she held a small, worn notebook in her hands. "Hi, Daddy," Sophie said with a shyness that broke the hearts of everyone present, except Victoria. Edward smiled, the first genuine smile that Constance had seen him direct at his daughter. "Hi, my dear. Constance told me you wanted to play a song for me. It's a song that Mommy loved very much," Sophie said, walking toward the piano. "I practiced a lot to play it right for you." Victoria stepped forward. "Edward, perhaps this isn't the best time. Sophie should be studying, and—" "Let her play, Victoria," Edward said, with a firmness that surprised his wife. "I'm curious to hear." Sophie sat on the piano bench, which was too high for her. Constance discreetly placed a cushion so that the little girl could reach the keys properly. For a moment, Sophie looked at the keys in silence, as if gathering courage. "This song is called Clair de Lune by Beethoven," she said, looking at her father. "Mommy always said that when I played, she was listening from up in heaven." And then Sophie began to play. The first note echoed through the room with a crystalline purity that made Edward sit up straight in his chair. But as the melody developed, something extraordinary happened. It wasn't just a child playing the piano. It was a soul pouring out its pain, its longing, its hope through every chord. "Constance." Tears welled up in Edward's eyes. Sophie's music wasn't technically perfect, but it was filled with such deep, genuine emotion that it touched something primal in the soul of those who listened. Victoria stood motionless by the window, but Constance noticed her hands trembling slightly. Sophie played with her eyes closed, gently swaying her body to the rhythm of the music. There was something almost ethereal in the way she connected with the instrument, as if the piano and the girl were one, expressing a language that transcended words. When she reached the climax of the piece, Sophie opened her eyes and looked directly at Edward. For a moment, father and daughter connected through the music in a way they had never experienced before. It was as if all barriers, all the distance created by months of manipulation from Victoria, vanished in the face of that melody. The music ended with a softness that left a profound silence in the room. Edward remained still for several seconds, tears streaming freely down his face. "Sophie," he finally said, his voice choked. That was extraordinary." Sophie's little face lit up with a joy that Constance hadn't seen in months. "Did you really like it, Daddy?" Edward stood up and walked over to the piano, kneeling beside his daughter. "I didn't just like it, my dear. I was moved. How did you learn to play like that?" "I practiced when no one was watching," Sophie said shyly. "I watched videos on the tablet and tried to copy. Victoria said the piano makes too much noise, so I only played very softly." Edward furrowed his brow, looking at Victoria. "Too much noise? Sophie, What you did wasn't noise. It's art. Really? Sophie's eyes sparkled. Really? And you know what? I think you need real piano lessons. With a teacher who can teach you everything properly. At that moment, Sophie did something that surprised everyone. She hugged her father with a desperate strength, as if she wanted to reclaim all the lost hugs at once. I love you so much, Daddy, she whispered. I was so afraid you wouldn't like me. Edward froze for a second, clearly shocked by the revelation. What do you mean, afraid that I wouldn't like you? Sophie, you are my daughter. I love you more than anything in this world. Really? Even when I do wrong things. What wrong things? Edward pulled his daughter back to look into her eyes. Sophie, you don't do wrong things. You are a wonderful girl. Victoria finally moved, approaching with a forced smile. Edward, I think it's time for Sophie to go to bed. She has swimming lessons early tomorrow. Actually, Edward said, still holding his daughter, I think we're going to cancel swimming tomorrow. I want to spend the whole day with my daughter. It's been too long since we've done that. Victoria's smile faltered. But Edward, Sophie's routine is very important. The routine can wait a day, Edward said firmly. Sophie, how about we go choose a piano just for you tomorrow? A smaller one, so you can reach the keys properly? Sophie screamed with joy, the first genuine shout of happiness that echoed in that house in months. Constance, watching from afar, felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The plan had worked better than she expected, but she knew Victoria wouldn't accept that change in dynamics without a fight. Edward, Victoria said, trying to keep a casual tone. Can we talk for a minute in private? Sure. Sophie, how about you play one more piece? I want to hear everything you know. As Sophie returned to the piano, Edward and Victoria stepped away to the hallway. Constance, pretending to organize the china cabinet, managed to catch part of the conversation. Edward, you need to be careful not to spoil Sophie too much, Victoria was saying. She spent months learning discipline. Discipline? Edward looked confused. Victoria, our daughter has extraordinary talent. How could I not have noticed this before? Because you were being sensible, Victoria replied quickly. Children need structure, not excessive praise. Excessive praise? Edward's voice was getting louder. Victoria, did you hear the music she played? That wasn't a child making noise. That was an artist expressing herself. Constance heard footsteps approaching and pretended to be busy. Edward returned to the room with a thoughtful expression, while Victoria followed him with a tense face. Sophie, Edward said, sitting beside his daughter on the piano bench. Tell me something. Would you like to learn more songs? Maybe even participate in recitals? What's a recital? Sophie asked. It's when musicians play for other people, like a small concert. Sophie's eyes widened. I could play for other people. If you want to, of course. I want to, Sophie exclaimed. Can I play for Grandma Mary too? I haven't seen her in so long. Edward suddenly stopped. Grandma Mary? Sophie, why don't you see Grandma Mary? Sophie looked at Victoria fearfully, then back at her father. Victoria said Grandma Mary moved far away and doesn't want to see me anymore because I'm a problem child. The silence that followed was deafening. Edward looked from Sophie to Victoria with an expression that Constance recognized immediately, the expression of a man who had just discovered he was being deceived. Victoria, Edward said slowly, my mother hasn't moved. She lives in the same house as always, 20 minutes from here. Victoria's mask finally began to crack, and Constance knew that that night would change everything. The silence in the piano room was so dense it felt solid. Edward remained seated next to Sophie, but Constance saw his body stiffen like a spring ready to be released. Victoria stood near the window, her pale face contrasting with the red lipstick that suddenly looked like blood on her lips. Victoria, Edward repeated, his voice dangerously low. Did you tell Sophie that my mother moved? Edward, I can explain. Victoria began, but her voice came out trembling. Daddy, Sophie interrupted, with innocence. Kids can be cruel, Victoria said. Grandma Mary doesn't want to see me anymore because I'm a bad girl. Is that why Mommy went to heaven too? Because I'm bad. Constance saw the exact moment something broke inside Edward. His eyes narrowed, his hands clenched into fists, and he slowly stood up, like a predator preparing to attack. Sophie, my princess, he said, carefully controlling his voice. Can you go with Aunt Constance for a few minutes? Daddy needs to talk to Victoria. Constance immediately stepped closer. Come with me, sweetheart. Let's make some hot chocolate in the kitchen. But did I do something wrong? Sophie asked, confused by the sudden tension in the room. No, my princess, Edward said, kneeling to be at eye level with his daughter. You didn't do anything wrong. You never did anything wrong. And Grandma Mary loves you very much, just as I love you. Constance took Sophie by the hand and led her out of the room, but not to the kitchen. Instead, she stopped in the hallway, where she could hear the conversation that was about to explode. Instinctively, she knew this would be a turning point, and she might need to intervene if things got out of control. Carmen, she called softly to the cook, who appeared immediately. Stay with Sophie for a few minutes. Make that special hot chocolate she likes. Carmen immediately understood the gravity of the situation and took Sophie, distracting her with promises of marshmallows and whipped cream. From the piano room, Constance heard Edward's voice explode. What the hell did you do to my daughter? Edward, please, let me explain. Victoria tried. Explain what? That you lied to a 6-year-old LD about her own grandmother? That you made my daughter believe she is responsible for her mother's death? You don't understand, Victoria said, her voice taking on a defensive tone. Sophie was too attached to the past. Her mother, her grandmother. She needed to learn to live in the present with our new family. Our new family, Edward shouted. Victoria, you are not Sophie's mother. You are my wife, but that doesn't give you the right to psychologically torture a child. Torture? Edward, for heaven's sake, you're being dramatic. All I did was set boundaries, create discipline. Discipline. Edward's voice was reaching a level Constance had never heard before. Making a child believe she killed her own mother is discipline. Constance heard the sound of heavy footsteps, as if Edward was pacing back and forth. Edward, you need to understand, Victoria continued, now with tears in her voice. When we got married, Sophie was a spoiled child, constantly crying for her dead mother. She needed to get over it, to grow. She is 6 years old, Edward roared. 6 years old, Victoria. And you thought the solution was to make her feel guilty for her mother's death. There was a tense silence, and then Constance heard something that made her decide to intervene, the sound of something breaking. She rushed into the room and found Edward holding a crystal vase that he had thrown against the wall. Victoria was huddled in a corner, finally showing real fear. Dr. Edward, Constance said firmly, you need to calm down. Sophie can hear. Edward looked at her, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Constance, did you know? Did you know what was happening? Constance took a deep breath. It was time to reveal everything. Dr. Edward, can I speak with you privately? Anything you have to say can be said in front of her, Edward said, pointing at Victoria. Constance hesitated, but the urgency of the situation spoke louder. She took her phone from her pocket and showed the photos she had taken of Victoria's journal. Dr. Edward, I found this a few days ago. I thought you should know. Edward took the phone and began to read. Constance saw his expression change from anger to disbelief, and finally to a coldness that frightened her. If I can get her to leave before this, I can convince Edward to change the will, Edward read aloud. I started telling her that her mother left because of her. Children are easy to manipulate when you attack their self-esteem. Each word Edward read was like a slap in the face to Victoria. She tried to approach, but he raised his hand, stopping her. Edward, I can explain. Sophie is quieter, more withdrawn. She stopped asking to see her father. Edward commented the other day that she is more well-behaved. If he knew it was because she is afraid to breathe, Edward continued, his voice taking on a chilling tone that was more terrifying than the shouting. Please, Edward. I will start building a medical history that Sophie has behavioral disorders. Edward turned to face Victoria. Were you planning to institutionalize my daughter? Victoria finally broke down. Edward, I didn't know what else to do. She reminded you so much of Helena. Every time I looked at her, I saw that woman judging me. Helena died 2 years ago, Victoria. And Sophie is just an innocent child. But the money, Edward, Victoria said desperately. Helena's will leaves everything to Sophie. $5 million, the company shares. I just wanted to secure our future. Edward was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was so cold it sent shivers down Constance's spine. Our future? Victoria, you destroyed a 6-year-old child for money. You made my daughter believe she killed her own mother out of greed. Edward, please, we can work this out. I can change, I can. Get out of my house. Edward said simply. What? You heard me. I want you to leave my house now. Tonight. Edward, you can't be serious. We're married. For a short time, Edward replied. My lawyer will receive the divorce papers on Monday. Victoria tried one more time. Edward, think about what you're doing. The scandal, your reputation in business. Edward laughed, but it was a laugh devoid of humor. My reputation? Victoria, I'd rather be known as the man who divorced a cruel woman than as the father who let his daughter be psychologically destroyed. At that moment, Sophie appeared in the doorway of the family room, holding a cup of hot chocolate. Daddy? Why is everyone shouting? Edward immediately knelt down and opened his arms. Sophie ran to him, and he embraced her as if he wanted to protect her from all the evils of the world. Sophie, my princess, Edward said, his voice choked. Daddy made a very big mistake. I let someone make you feel bad, and that should have never, ever happened. It wasn't your fault, Daddy, Sophie said innocently. Auntie Constance always said you loved me, even when I thought you didn't. Edward looked at Constance over Sophie's head, and she saw pure gratitude in his eyes. Auntie Constance was right, Edward said. And you know what? Tomorrow we're going to visit Grandma Mary. She's been missing you so much. Really? Sophie stepped back to look into her father's face. She didn't move away? No, my dear. She never moved away. And she never stopped loving you. Constance saw Victoria silently heading for the exit, defeated. But there was something in her eyes, a mix of anger and humiliation, that made her worry. That battle had been won, but Constance suspected the war was far from over. The 3 months following Victoria's departure from the Smith mansion were like watching a wilted flower slowly come back to life. Constance, who had been promoted from night staff to housekeeper and official caregiver for Sophie, witnessed daily the small miracles of a child rediscovering the joy of living. The most visible transformation was physical. Sophie had gained weight. Her cheeks returned to the rosy hue of childhood, and her green eyes sparkled with a light that Constance thought had been lost forever. But it was the emotional transformation that truly touched everyone's heart in the house. Auntie Constance, look! Sophie shouted on a sunny February morning, running into the kitchen where Constance was preparing breakfast. I managed to play the entire Moonlight Sonata without missing a note. Sophie's progress on the piano had been meteoric. Edward had hired the best children's piano teacher in Los Angeles, Maestro Clara Benedetti, a 65-year-old Italian lady who was genuinely impressed by the girl's natural talent. Mr. Edward, the maestro had said after the first lesson, your little girl has a rare gift. Very rare. In 40 years of teaching piano, I've seen talent like this only 3 times. Edward, who now insisted on being present for all of his daughter's piano lessons, was moved to tears. Teacher, make her the best pianist you can. Money is no object. It's not a matter of money, the maestro replied. It's a matter of love. And for the first time, I can see that this little girl feels loved. The relationship between father and daughter also blossomed in a touching way. Edward had drastically reduced his work trips, promoting 2 of his managers to take on responsibilities that were previously solely his. Now, he came home every day at 6 p.m. to have dinner with Sophie and listen to her play the piano. Daddy, Sophie said one of those afternoons while practicing a piece by Chopin, can you tell me how you and Mommy met? It was a question Edward had been avoiding for 2 years, but now he felt ready to answer. He sat down beside his daughter on the piano bench and began. Your mother, Helen, was a professional pianist. I met her at a charity concert that my company sponsored. She played exactly this music you're learning, the Nocturne in E-flat by Chopin. Did she play well? Like an angel, Edward smiled. Just like you. In fact, you inherited her talent. And you know what? I'm sure she's very proud to see how you play. Sophie smiled and resumed playing, but this time with even more feeling. The reconciliation with Grandma Mary had been another emotional moment. The 72-year-old lady had cried profusely upon reuniting with her granddaughter, and since then, she visited the mansion 3 times a week. My granddaughter, Grandma Mary would say every time she hugged Sophie. I never, ever forgot you. Every day, I prayed to see you again. Mary had also brought something precious, photos and videos of Helen playing the piano. Sophie spent hours watching the videos of her mother, trying to imitate not only the music, but also the elegant gestures and posture at the piano. Grandma, did Mommy hold her hands like this? Sophie would ask, mimicking the finger positions she saw in the videos. Exactly like that, my love. You're just like her. Constance watched these interactions with a full heart. There were moments when she became so emotional that she needed to step away to cry tears of joy in private. Carmen, who had become an invaluable ally throughout the crisis, also noticed the changes. "Constance, my dear," she said one afternoon while they were preparing dinner together. "This house has truly become a home. There's laughter, there's music, there's love." "It's true," Constance agreed. "But sometimes I still worry. Sophie still has occasional nightmares. She still gets anxious when Edward has to travel." "That's normal," Carmen reassured her. "A child doesn't overcome 2 years of psychological trauma overnight. But look at the progress she's made." Indeed, the progress was remarkable. Sophie had started speaking normally again, no longer whispering as if she were afraid to disturb anyone. She began asking questions, expressing opinions, and showing the healthy tantrums typical of a 6-year-old. The child therapist, Dr. Robert Mendez, whom Edward had hired to support Sophie, confirmed the improvement at each session. "Mr. Edward," the doctor said in one of the sessions, Sophia is recovering exceptionally well. The family support she is receiving now is crucial for her healing. Doctor, may I ask, how long will it take for her to fully recover? Traumas in early childhood leave marks, but children are resilient. With love, stability, and therapy, Sophie can have a completely normal and happy life. Edward sighed with relief. And what about music? Can the piano help in therapy? Absolutely. Music is a powerful form of emotional expression. For Sophie, the piano is not just a talent. It is a bridge to connect with the positive memories of her mother and a way to process her feelings. Life in the Smith mansion had found a new rhythm. Mornings began with Sophie practicing the piano while Constance prepared breakfast. Edward always came down at 7:30 a.m. to have coffee with his daughter before heading to work. In the afternoons, after school, Sophie had piano lessons with Maestro Clara, followed by playtime in the garden or drawing at the kitchen table while Constance prepared dinner. Evenings were reserved for family time. Edward helped Sophie with her homework, and then they had dinner together while Sophie shared stories about her day at school. Finally, there was always a little impromptu recital in the piano room, where Sophie played for her father the pieces she had learned. "Daddy," Sophie said one of those nights after playing a waltz by Brahms, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course, my princess. Why was Victoria so mean to me?" Edward was silent for a moment, carefully choosing his words. "Some people, my dear, do bad things when they are hurt inside. But it is never the child's fault. Never. Can she come back?" "No, Sophie. She will never come back. And even if she wanted to, Daddy would never allow it." Sophie nodded, satisfied. "I like our family more now. Just you, me, Auntie Constance, Carmen, and Grandma Mary." "I like it too," Edward smiled. "We are a perfect family, just the way we are." One afternoon, Constance received a call that left her worried. It was from a friend who worked at the courthouse where Victoria had filed for divorce. "Constance," said the friend, "I don't know if I should be telling you this, but that woman, Victoria, was here today. She was furious, saying she wouldn't accept leaving empty-handed, that she was entitled to half of the assets." Constance felt a chill in her stomach. And then, her lawyer said that with the evidence Edward presented, that diary and the recordings, she has no right to anything. She could still be prosecuted for child abuse. And how did she react? Badly. Very badly. She left here saying she was going to make her own justice. After hanging up, Constance felt restless. She knew that people like Victoria did not disappear quietly. There was something in the revenge in her eyes that night of the confrontation that worried her. She decided to double her vigilance and stay alert. The happiness of the Smith family had been regained with much suffering, and Constance would do anything to protect it. 6 months after Victoria's departure, the Smith mansion was buzzing for a very special event, Sophie's first official recital. Edward had rented the auditorium for his daughter to perform for family and friends in an event that would symbolically mark her complete recovery. "Auntie Constance, I'm so nervous," Sophie said on the morning of the recital as Constance styled her hair into delicate curls. "What if I forget the music? What if I play it wrong?" Constance smiled, adjusting the royal blue dress that Edward had specially made for the occasion. "My princess, you have played these pieces 1,000 times. And you know what? Even if you miss a note or two, What matters is that you are playing with your heart. Will Mommy be able to hear from heaven? I'm sure she will, Constance replied, kissing the girl's forehead. And she will be very proud of your courage. The auditorium was beautifully decorated with arrangements of white and blue roses, Helen's favorite colors. Edward had made sure that every detail was perfect, from the special lighting on stage to the Steinway grand piano borrowed from the concert hall. At 4 p.m., guests began to arrive. Grandma Mary, emotional, wore the pearl necklace that belonged to Helen. Carmen was elegant in a black dress that Edward insisted on buying for her. Edward's co-workers, family friends, Maestro Clara, and even Dr. Robert were present. Constance, Edward said, approaching her backstage, I want you to know that none of this would be possible without you. You saved my daughter. You saved my family. Dr. Edward, I just did what any mother would do. Constance replied, emotional. No, Edward said firmly. You did what a brave and honorable person does. And for that, I have a proposal for you. Edward handed her a sealed envelope. Don't open it now. Open it after the recital. At 5 p.m., the lights in the auditorium dimmed, and Sophie stepped onto the stage. Constance watched from the wings, her heart racing. The girl looked so small on the vast stage, but there was a determination in her steps that hadn't existed months ago. Sophie sat at the piano and looked at the audience. Through the microphone, her clear voice echoed through the auditorium. Good afternoon. My name is Sophie Smith. I am 6 years old, and today I will play for you songs that my mommy loved very much. She taught me, from up in heaven, that music is how our hearts talk to the world. An emotional murmur passed through the audience. Edward was in the front row, tears already streaming down his face. Sophie began with Für Elise, the first piece she had played for Constance on that fateful morning that changed everything. Each note came out perfectly, filled with emotion and maturity impossible for a 6-year-old. A 6-year-old child. Constance observed the audience. Not a dry eye was in sight. Even hardened businessmen were visibly moved by the girl's performance. The second piece was Clair de Lune, played with a sensitivity that transcended technique. Sophie had closed her eyes and let herself be carried away by the melody, as if she were speaking directly to her mother. For the third and final piece, Sophie surprised everyone. This last piece I composed myself, she announced. It's called Thank You, Auntie Constance, because she taught me that I deserve to be loved. Constance felt her legs go weak. Sophie had composed a song for her. The melody that came from the piano was simple, yet deeply touching. It was a delicate waltz that started sad and melancholic, but gradually became brighter, more hopeful, ending in a sequence of chords that sounded like pure joy. When Sophie finished, silence lasted a few seconds before the audience erupted in applause. Edward rushed to the stage and hugged his daughter, both crying with emotion. Sophie, my daughter, that was the most beautiful gift you could give me, Edward said into the microphone. Daddy, Sophie replied. Can I say something? Edward nodded, extending the microphone to her. I want to thank 3 very special people. First, my grandma Mary, who never stopped loving me. Second, my daddy, who learned to really listen to me. And third, my Auntie Constance, who saved me when I was very sad and taught me that good girls deserve to be happy. The audience applauded even louder. Constance, who had been called to the stage by Edward, was crying so much she could barely see. And also, Sophie continued, with the surprising wisdom of children, I want to tell all the kids here, if you are sad or someone is being mean to you, tell an adult you trust. Because every child deserves to be loved and protected. The recital ended with another round of deafening applause. Backstage, Constance finally opened the envelope that Edward had given her. Inside was an official document and a letter. The document was an adoption contract. Edward was proposing that she become Sophie's legal guardian if anything happened to him. The letter read, Constance, you have proven that love has nothing to do with blood, but rather with dedication, courage, and integrity. I want you to be officially part of our family, not as a housekeeper, but as Sophie's second mother. The salary I propose will allow you to bring your children to Los Angeles if you want. You have given us a new chance to be happy. Let us give back. With love and eternal gratitude, Edward. Constance cried even more as she read the letter. Her journey had started as a simple need for a job, but had transformed into a life mission. Months later, The Smith mansion was even busier. 3 of Constance's children had moved to Los Angeles. Mary, 7, who became Sophie's best friend. John, 15, whom Edward had enrolled in a technical school for construction. And Anna, 20, who received a scholarship to study education at UCLA. "Auntie Constance," Sophie said one afternoon while teaching Mary to play the piano, "do you think sad stories can have happy endings?" Constance smiled, watching her biological daughter and her heart daughter play the piano together, while Edward read the newspaper in a nearby armchair and Grandma Mary knitted on the sofa. "My princess," she replied, "I think the best stories are those where people learn to be brave and fight for what is right. And you know what? Our story is just beginning." Sophie smiled and continued to play. The music echoed through the mansion, now truly a home, where love had triumphed over cruelty, truth had overcome lies, and a family had been reborn stronger through the storm. Constance looked out the window at the garden where her children played and knew she had found her place in the world, not just as a housekeeper, but as the guardian of a family that had learned the true meaning of unconditional love. And every night, when she tucked the children in, Constance said a prayer of gratitude, knowing that sometimes angels come disguised as housekeepers who simply refuse to stay silent in the face of injustice.